Hey everybody, what's up? So as you can tell probably from the more balanced volume of my voice, and me being quieter, this is another last second recorded one that I'm doing on the Monday night before this one will be coming out. The weekend got away from me and I didn't have time to record something until just now. So I'm going to do something a little simple, probably a little shorter than the last few 20-minute long massive Kirblogs I've been doing. This is a question that comes from Anonymous on Tumblr. Question for the Kirblog. Speaking as one former Thomas the Tank Engine obsessive to another, care to elaborate on your past with Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends? You did mention it being a potential Kirblog topic in the Halloween Specials vlog. That I did. For those of you who did not see that, over this past Halloween in 2014, I did a Kirblog about some really scary moments in media that just made me absolutely crap my pants, not literally, but figuratively, and as a child. And one of the stories I told was about not quite the Halloween special, but a scary episode that was probably presented as a Halloween special in the U.S. For Thomas the Tank Engine. And I think I did mention that I would probably talk about it as a separate Kirblog. So here we are. Figured why not? I usually like to line these up with something in particular happening at the same time, but I feel like nothing's really happening that's all that important with Thomas the Tank Engine, so I figured why not talk about it now. So Thomas the Tank Engine was probably the first of many childhood obsessions, but it was the first, later preceded by stuff like Power Rangers and Disney movies and Pokemon and etc., a lot of stuff like that. But Thomas the Tank Engine, I believe, was the first big thing that I was just absolutely fixated on from birth, more or less. I think it had been airing in the U.S. maybe for a little while. I can't remember exactly when it was brought over here, kind of coupled together with Shining Time Station. Might have been before. I was born in '89, and I was raised immediately on it because it was on preschool TV. It was on PBS, I believe, at the time. During those years. And my dad, he was a massive Ringo Starr fan and a massive George Carlin fan, both of which, of course, were narrators for the original couple seasons of the show in the U.S. So that was a big thing, and that certainly probably made it more tolerable for him to enjoy watching with me when I was a toddler. One of my earliest memories in terms of when I was just growing up is my dad and my older brother, my half brother, they were both quite artistically inclined, I guess you could say, and they wanted to really deck out my room with some cool shit. They just kind of wanted to have an excuse to make some cool things together. And so what they did was they made my entire room into a giant mural of Thomas characters, just kind of all over the place with different tracks and things like that. And I remember they had a big tunnel. That's right, yeah, there was a tunnel, and then coming out of it was my bed, which was outfitted to become a giant Thomas bed, while other characters like Percy and James and all of them were on the wall. And it was pretty badass. Unfortunately, I don't think I have any pictures of it anymore anywhere. I'm sure they might be buried in the depths of my old shit somewhere back home. But yeah, that was a really fucking cool room to have when you're 3 or 4 years old. And that was also the beginning of I was a big collector of stuff as a kid. A lot of those other childhood obsessions, I collected toys of Power Ranger characters and Disney characters and Pokemon, but Pokemon was probably one of my biggest collections. But Thomas the Tank Engine, I had a massive amount of the metal toy trains in particular were ones that were probably my favorite thing to collect. And the Brio, which were the wooden train sets, I had a lot of those as well. And of course the VHS tapes, yes, back when those existed, had a lot of those. The metal trains in particular, I remember it was kind of like the precursor to my obsession with Pokemon and collecting a lot of that stuff, because it's anytime a new set of characters would show up that were from episodes of the show I hadn't seen yet or whatever, it was a massive deal. And there were always these particular stores I'd want to go to, in New York. There was FAO Schwartz, which was it's still around, but it was an alternative to Toys R Us. And they always had a massive Thomas section with lots of stuff. And there were some local stores back in Long Island where I lived at the time that had a lot of the metal train sets and everything that were there. And I'd love to get my hands on those. So that was kind of the visceral, just, being a kid kind of level of obsession with it, and of course, my parents could tell you I probably rewatched the videotapes of the show ridiculous amounts of times. I was still staying with the show for probably a little longer than I should have for how old I was. I don't remember exactly how many years, but I mean, there was a point where I was just like, all right, I'm done. I don't care anymore. It was probably around the time that Alec Baldwin took over. Might have been like just before that, but eventually I was just like, I'm kind of done. And I remember this, just a little quick funny side story. My dad and I heard about the not live action. I guess it is live action, but the movie, the Thomas the Tank Engine movie, being announced in a newspaper like years and years and years and years ago. And I remember it was something like, Thomas the Tank Engine, finally gets his big Hollywood break, and Shiny Time Station will hit the silver screen, something like that. As a kid, I did not give a flying fuck about Shiny Time Station. It was just a filler in between waiting for actual Thomas episodes to air. And since I collected the VHS tapes, I was just like, I don't give a shit. I'm just going to watch the tapes so I can watch the actual Thomas episodes. For my UK listeners, if you don't know what Shiny Time Station was, it was a live-action show where they worked the narrator as a character called Mr. Conductor into the show, and he would tell one-off episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine in between parts of the main story with the live-action actors, like working at a train station or some nonsense. It was stupid. I didn't care. Anyway, whatever. Because that was only for American audiences, because apparently they didn't think that the Thomas episodes could stand up on their own, but they actually did. Quite more so, and they far outlasted Shiny Time Station. Anyway, so we heard about it years ago, and it was just like quiet. It was like dead. Now there's nothing new about the movie for like years and years and years. We totally forgot about it. And then eventually, The Magic Railroad, Sparkle, 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 finally came out. And, we went to go see it. By that point I had been long since out of the show. I probably gave up a lot of my toys and everything, but I was just like, Dad, you want to go see this just for old time's sake? And he's like, you know what? We waited for years. Let's go see it. And we did. And it was pretty fucking terrible. And I know that there was, I did some looking into that there was going to be a new Thomas movie that was going to be kind of cool. It sounded pretty interesting. From what I understand, it's been canceled and it's not happening at any point, and that's kind of a shame because I would have gone to see that at some point. One of the most exciting things about the movie when that was happening, though, was seeing that, of course, again, even as a child, when I had no concept of what the fuck voice acting was, I was still interested in hearing the individual voices of the Thomas characters that would be in that, and finding out that many of them were people from the Toronto pool, who I've heard on like Sailor Moon and Mega Man Legends and Capcom games and things like that. And then of course now we have the CG series where all the characters have their own individual voices, and it's not for me. Obviously it's for preschool kids, and I didn't grow up with this version, and so it's not important to me. So that was a thing. And with the movie, it was funny just finding out years later that Magic Railway was like delayed for so long because of like some weird like funding issues or some bullshit like that. I forget what the exact story was. It's somewhere out there, but it was just kind of funny. And then, but I watched the show for like ages and was still like big into the franchise. And I remember later, like there were times like throughout college, I think like my first year of going to SVA, like 7 years ago now. Oh my God. I went back and I like rewatched all the old episodes, and I think I did it again sometime after I graduated. And, I reached a point where I'm just like, okay, I'm done listening to these. I don't care anymore. And I guess there was a stage where just, being into the series, it really inspired a lot of like creativity. I've never really been a fanfic writer or anything like that. Obviously people know I've done fan cartoons of stuff, and those of you who have watched the Parody Rangers movie know that I had the train Megazords, in there. They were all, of course, references to Thomas the Tank Engine characters. And I did not, to people who have asked, no, I did not know that there was a train series. Actually, at the time that I wrote the script for the Parody Rangers movie, that Power Rangers incarnation was not made, or Sentai, I should say, not Power Rangers. In Japan, it was not made yet, so no, it was not inspired by that. Apparently, I predicted the future. But no, I just threw that in there because it was a fun little reference. But so I never really made I never wrote fan fiction or anything. But Thomas the Tank Engine inspired a lot of like storytelling creativity. I think now that I think about it, that might have been the thing that made me into like wanting to be a storyteller. it's kind of funny to put that together now. But yeah, like the Brio train sets that I had in particular, I would make up a lot of stories of because the stories were so kind of like, I mean, they were basic, but like they allowed for a lot of imagination. Like when you had a basic idea of like what the island of Sordor is like and what the train's lives were like or whatever, you could just sort of come up with ideas like, what if there was a story about Thomas and Percy doing this, or Toby and James doing this, or Gordon and Henry doing this, or whatever, interchangeable. And I collected a lot of the main characters, so it was really simple for me to do stuff. And it's funny to see how a lot of the other things that I was into were kind of like seeping over and influencing, this and that. With the Brio, like wooden train sets, I did a lot of like basic stuff. I think that the darkest thing I did was probably some bullshit about like the diesels like taking over, which became like pretty much what the show did later. Like, we're gonna make the diesels the evil characters or whatever, and they're gonna like try to run down the other place or whatever. It was just some basic nonsense. But I remember with the metal trains, I think I was like really big into Star Fox 64 at the time, and I had some shit where like I think it was Thomas, Percy, James, Rheneas, and I forget one more. I can't remember who it was. But it was one of the yellow characters, yellow paint. Oh, it was Ben. That's right. It was Ben of Ben and Bill fame. Ben and Bill fame. Yeah. Anyway, so I had them in like a. They were like space trains. Like I had them flying around like they had fucking jetpacks on. Like it was a Star Fox game. It was ridiculous. I don't know what the fuck was going on with that, but that was a thing that I did at one point, embarrassingly. And I almost left this story out. Okay, so one of the stories that I came up with was one that I came up with my dad. Most of them were on my own, but this is one that I shared with my dad. I distinctly remember. I think I built Thomas characters like out of like Legos or some nonsense, and something like that. But they weren't the actual toys or whatever. But we had this thing where it was like my dad was like playing pretend as Diesel with the little thing that I built, and I was being all the other characters or whatever. And so the whole thing was like the other trains were like, the other engines, I should say, not the other trains. The other engines were, being like, we're going to a party. And then like Diesel was like mocking them, being like, you going to a train party? Which my dad would still torture me with that line of like, you going to a train party? And I'm like, shut up, Dad. So someday I'm going to have him on a Kirblog and we'll just tell a bunch of stupid stories about my childhood nonsense. But anyway. There's a little tease for you someday. But what was I going to say? Yeah, so like that was the whole premise, and then like all the other characters kept coming by, like, I'm going to this party. Oh, you're going to a train party, like making fun of them or whatever. And then the whole joke was that he was getting jealous. It's like, I want to get invited, and then he just shows up, and then it turned out, the party was for you, Diesel. It's your birthday or something like that. I don't remember, but that we just did that one day, and then that like stuck with us for years, and just like, you going to a train party was like a thing between us and still is. Like once in a while, I think I'll remind it of it and who quote this. Dad, if you're listening there, I finally told this story. He listens to these. Anyway, so that was the thing. Yeah, but no, it's funny because like stuff like that, again, it was so vague that like it really allowed for like me to come up with different things. And I think kind of going into the final point about it was there's a reason I think that this show like really resonated with a lot of people and why kids liked it so much. I've heard a lot of cases where, people who don't know, I know I've probably mentioned this on Kirblogs before, but I'll reiterate. I am technically autistic. I grew up with Asperger's syndrome. I still technically have it. I'm high functioning. But I bring that up because I've heard like studies have shown that like in particular Thomas the Tank Engine really resonates with children with Asperger's syndrome because it allows them to like really more easily learn, colors and numbers and things like that because of the way that the characters were designed. Were like, they had very defined color palettes, and each of them had a number and everything. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think that and of course the interchangeable kind of facial expressions, the basic kind of facial expressions or whatever. I think that might have been something that lent itself to the simplicity of it and why people kind of like just connected with it more easily. But the other thing was, I think it was very, it wasn't like a lot of other kids shows, like a lot of other kids franchises and things. Like it was, because I grew up never liking Barney or any of that kind of, schlock, on Nick Jr. and PBS and all that. it felt kind of just more, not like it was so mature. I mean, I knew like back in Europe, apparently like an older audience still really enjoyed it, which is not too surprising to hear. I don't know. I think it's like, it was just treated a little bit more real, especially in the beginning. I remember like seeing, the creator, the Reverend, Wilbur Audrey, I believe his name is, the original creator, who's a grumpy old British motherfucker. He was talking about how like it was, a lot of it was like a commentary on like, people who bitch and whine and complain about their job and like, they have it so easy and they get taught a lesson. Like, it was a thing. It's like a lot of the episodes had like a real lesson to, what was happening. It wasn't just all like, sunshine, rainbows, Teletubbies bullshit. I was too old, thankfully, by the time like Teletubbies and Blue's Clues and a lot of that stuff and Dora the Explorer came along. I was already like too old for that, and I was like, no, I'm good, thanks. And I was just never really into it, but I don't know. But Thomas, just I guess because like it wasn't just that the characters were also I think pretty defined, and what their whole attitude was and a lot of what they did. But I think there was another thing too, and still the idea of like a lesson was important, like a moral, like even if it was like exemplified through like misbehaving and being karma, being punished for it and or sometimes even suffering for it and having things taken away or whatever. You think about stuff like even just the very first episode that aired was like, Thomas like being an asshole to Gordon, and then he's like, oh, you want to? Like, I can pull the express, douchebag. He's like, oh, I'll make you pull the goddamn express, and you'll see how fucking easy it is. And he's wiped out by the end of it. And he's like, well, I should stop giving Gordon so much shit. Like Henry, be like, oh, I don't want to spoil my green paint. Okay, good. You can just stay inside this fucking hole and rot. It's like, wow. This is on PBS or Nick Jr. or whatever. It's like, this is getting a little real, I feel like there's things about that I think still, like, they kind of just translate, I guess, to an older audience in a way. And it's kind of admirable. I think later they probably got a little bit more, like, safer, because, like, Thomas went from being, like, it's like with Mickey Mouse. Like, Mickey Mouse used to be kind of a little shit, and then they were like, oh, let's make him really nice and helpful all the time, which is fine. I can see the value in that. But it's like with Thomas, too. It's like Thomas was the little, trickster tank engine, and he was always picking on the older bigger, stronger engines or whatever. But then as time went on, they were like, oh, we're going to give him a branch line, we'll make him responsible, and now he has to be a good guy and help everybody out, etc. And it's like, okay, fair enough. But I guess it's interesting to see that growth, to see the characters develop and actually learn and change over time, but only to a certain extent, I guess. I don't know. But man, well, look at that. This is going to end up being as long as the other Kirblogs, isn't it? Whoops. Oh well. Talk about Thomas the Tank Engine for another 30 years, why don't you, Kirb? Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it's funny, kind of just, again, talking about it, I realized, like, I think it really was a big influence on a lot of my just storytelling sensibilities and how I defined characters and things, and I've certainly taken more nods from things beyond just that, but I think it was probably what helped lay the groundwork for, making a lot of my own original stuff, and maybe, who knows, it really might have been the thing that pushed me to want to do what I do today. Maybe not necessarily the animation side of it, but just be a storyteller. I think that very well could have been the thing that inspired, and I wonder about if maybe that did for other people. I don't know. I guess that's a good place to end it. So I don't know, in your comments below, like, did you grow up with Thomas the Tank Engine? If you didn't, what did you think of it? Were you kind of on the outside looking in, or were you too old for it? And did you have any siblings that were big into it? And how was it like seeing their obsession? Because they probably were, I would imagine. If you did grow up with it, do you have a favorite episode or favorite character, favorite moment or anything? Do you have any weird stories as a child or anything like that from playing with it and playing with your toys or watching episodes or anything? Let me know, did it influence you like it influenced me? That's a lot of questions, a lot of things to take in, but a lot of things to think about. And if you have ideas for other Kirblog topics in the future, please leave a comment about that as well if you feel, or if you want to hit me up on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, whatever is most convenient for you, whatever's most convenient for you listening. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Fuck.